I'd like to point out before I begin that I am at heart a storyteller, so I may be incredibly biased in my following statement, or my perceptions be terribly skewed because all I do day in and day out is think about narrative art and character development. So, DigiBrony just posted a crazy video breaking down characterization in MLP and beyond. I saw this on my YouTube feed and flipped my collective shit. Characterization? Hell yes! Nothing gets my inner storyteller stoked like talking about character development. Let's check this out. 10 minutes later, I come out of the other side of the video struggling to formulate my thoughts about what was said. I seem to agree and disagree simultaneously about the points presented. 2.5 hours and a few keyboard smashes of frustration later, I think I've accurately articulated my stance on the subject at hand. Digi's argument of characters in MLP having a strong connection to people based on chemistry and what he calls the aesthetic persona, which I'd probably just call aesthetics, even though Digi's term sounds a lot cooler, and according to this guy, apparently the term is called physiognomy, but I'm just going to use aesthetic persona because A, you'll know what I'm talking about, and B, it just rolls off the tongue a bit easier, isn't wrong. It's true, aesthetics and the presentation of a character play a huge role in the attraction and attachment to characters that we as viewers witness. However, I would argue that his own definitions of the terms and the examples provided actually reinforce my personal view that the primary and most important aspect of fictional characters and their relatability is depth. Let's start with chemistry, or the process of creating new conflicts and ideals by having two or more members of the cast interact. This is a great tool to use in literature, and DigiBrony defines it very well, using his example of how DHX has played Rainbow Dash off the other members of the main six. These points of chemistry lead to some great moments, and as Digi stated, we learned a lot about Rainbow Dash with each of these interactions, specifically how her personality reacts to other character archetypes. Wait a minute. If we learn about Rainbow Dash, then isn't this developing her character and adding new layers of depth to it? Yes. Chemistry isn't a separate point of characterization, but rather a subsection of depth. By playing characters off each other and subsequently introducing new elements that couldn't be displayed from them alone, we are in turn learning more about how each character interacts, behaves, and emotes in new kinds of situations. All of these actions add more to our understanding of the characters in question and as a result lead to a more in-depth understanding of them. Chemistry between characters is a tool of character development. Let's take a look now at the newly coined aesthetic persona and at a character with a strong sense of the trait. Another one that Digi mentioned, Princess Celestia. Her presence suggests exactly what Digi stated, a wise ruler who brought with her a strong sense of reverence from those around her. Her design and base presentation implies a lot about who she is and what she does. Celestia has a very bold aesthetic persona. And yet, in the show, she bores me to no end. All the potential in the world doesn't really help if you never capitalize on it. Hell, even worse, it starts to feel like a missed opportunity. How many times has the fandom lamented the lack of Luna being an integral character in any sequence of events since she made her second appearance in Luna Eclipsed? An episode that brought her massive attention due to, adding depth to her character? The ruling sisters are just oozing with potential characterization due to their strong aesthetic persona, but I think few would argue that they would be opposed to having an episode that revolved around expanding them as characters and giving them some additional depth. And yet people absolutely love Luna and even Celestia. And while we can argue the strengths of their aesthetic persona all day, the fact of the matter is, in my mind and personal experience, this love comes from a source of character depth and development we haven't touched upon yet. Fan work. I found it kind of funny that out of all the characters to choose for an example of the aesthetic persona, Digi decides to mention Octavia and Vinyl Scratch. You couldn't have set up my retort any better. So, why does the fandom like Octavia and Vinyl so much? Well, their aesthetic persona, right? They looked cool and acted in an appealing manner in their extremely limited screen time they had, causing a lot of the fandom to take notice of them despite not actually doing anything or us learning anything about them. Correct, but what happened as a consequence of this aesthetic? The fandom developed the hell out of them. No one can say they like Octavia and Vinyl Scratch based solely on aesthetic persona, because even the term Octavia and Vinyl Scratch implies a connection between the two that is never presented in the show or established in their aesthetic persona. This is a result of the fandom adding depth to these blank canvas background ponies through a multitude of fan works. When one says they like the pairing, it isn't based on the character's aesthetic persona. It has to be from the depth and development that was created by the fandom, because the fandom is the only place this connection even exists. Without this development, the aesthetic persona is shallow and loses impact. These impressions serve as a spark of interest in a character and a desire to learn or create more about them. Lara sits like a human, yes, but why? Many people have crafted contrasting and overlapping explanations about why Lara does this and where her hobby/obsession comes from. Her aesthetic persona implied, or rather in this case was collectively interpreted as, an interest in humans. And while this made for some humorous macro images, it wouldn't have carried the weight or longevity it had if not for people starting to develop this characterization. People like Lyra so much not because of her aesthetic persona in the show, but because of the depth and development the community has since given her based on the inspiration that aesthetic persona sparked. This seeking or creation act is a process of developing the characters and adding depth, even if it isn't coming from the official source. And like it or not, if these fan-made characteristics are part of your understanding and admiration for these characters, then you too are appreciating them for reasons beyond their aesthetic persona. And at this point it's incredibly difficult to even separate the two because the fandom so strongly latches onto and expands the most minor of characters in this series. My point is that, at the end of the day, all roads of characterization lead back to either an exposition or expectation of depth. And even if we don't have it in the character as presented in the official release, we as a fandom seek it out, or in the case of those with the skills and or desire, forge it ourselves. Our love for so many minor characters can't be chalked up to mere aesthetic persona when 90% of us would most likely agree that Vinyl and Octavia know each other in some way, Lyra and Bon Bon are dating, Princess Celestia can be a bit of a troll, and Luna likes playing the occasional video game.